Well, I see you have arrived, and just in time to start your sentence. Well then, I hope you're prepared to serve some hard time, as we will experience 6 true stories of haunted prisons. I would not expect any time off for good behavior if I were you. First up tonight is from a guy that retells a story his prison guard buddy told him. It's called, A Story Told to Me by My Prison Guard Escort. I thought I just said that.
So I've been laying here in my bed scratching at the wall to mess with one of my roommates, and suddenly felt like this is the perfect time to relay one of the stories my prison guard escort told me shortly after we both saw what we thought was a man lean out from behind some boxes in the tunnel of a prison. I have no reason to think this story was made up, but I cannot confirm any details of this or the next story. I will tell this story in the first person to save a little typing, but these are his words, not mine.
I used to work night shift when I first started here in the prison. I always signed up for, but never got the Rover job. Rover is a guard that sits in the guard shack and makes rounds twice a shift to check every door and every gate to ensure they are locked, and checks the perimeter fences to make sure they have not been tampered with. One night I finally got what I thought was going to be the easiest shift I have ever had. I landed the Rover job. During that shift, my first trip around the perimeter and gates went just fine. Everything was as it should be. However, my second round was a little different. I was patrolling the tunnel access points, checking the gates and doors as I had done earlier that day. In the tunnel there are 3 books that the Rover must sign to prove they made their appointed rounds. I had books A and B signed, I just had book C to go. Book C lay down a long and dark corridor. Picture a long hallway with one bare bulb lighting up a patch of the path every 20 or 30 feet. I entered the hallway and closed and locked the gate behind me. As I started to walk towards the book end of the hall, I heard footsteps behind me. I hurried to the first patch of light and looked behind me. No one there. When I stopped, so did the accompanying footsteps, so I wrote it off as an echo. I continued on, and as soon as I exited the patch of light, the footsteps returned, this time just a little faster, almost like it was trying to catch up. Once again, in the next patch of light, I stopped and looked for my pursuer, and again I saw nothing, and the steps stopped. I turned and looked towards book C. It's 2 more patches of light away. It actually wasn't a third patch by itself, like a beacon of safety. I'm starting to get a little nervous about now, so I pull out my flashlight and shine it around. My light illuminates nothing but the damp walls of this part of the tunnel, so I keep on walking. As soon as I left that patch of light, I hear those steps again, only this time it sounds like they are jogging towards me. I quickly spin around and shine my light towards the sound, and once again see nothing. I decided now is not the time to mess around, so I ran to the last light and the book so I can get the hell out of this tunnel. As I reached the book, I could hear the steps sprinting towards me. I quickly signed my name in the book, and as I wrote down the time, I heard a heavy sigh behind me, and right in my ear a husky voice whispered my name. I slowly turned my head towards the sigh. Seeing nothing, I sprinted out of there, stopping only long enough to lock the doors behind me. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I can still feel the breath on my ear from when it whispered my name. I put in for a shift change right away, and I never signed up for Rover duty again.
Yeah, I can see how that could be just a little bit unnerving. On the other hand, maybe he just wanted to rat out on one of the other inmates. I mean, it's not like he has to worry about that whole snitches get stitches thing. Anyway, next we got one from a guy that when he was younger made some bad choices. Of course, they may not have been any worse than the choice he made to call out a ghost one night. We call this one the prison fire alarm puller.
So, this is my ghost story. Maybe it could have been just a hell of a coincidence, or just wrong timing, who knows. I'll tell it, and you guys tell me what you think. Okay, so when I was young, I didn't have much self-control, and I would get into a lot of fights and would end up doing jail time for it. Well, one time I was in a really old MD county jail for an 18-month stretch. I had become a trustee, aka an inmate trusted to move around the jail and have a job inside the jail. I was on overnight kitchen cleanup. Now there's not really much to do on this job, because the inmates who make the food already clean up after themselves pretty damn well. Well, it was me and a fellow inmate, and the shift was always from midnight until 5 a.m. So anyways, the kitchen lady always told us about some guy who offed himself there in the 80s, and after that, the hoses and stuff would always go off on their own. I, of course, was a skeptic and thought total BS. So, one night I was in the kitchen with the other inmate. He was in the bathroom napping. Because like I said, there was literally nothing to do on this job. I was in the main kitchen area, getting myself a cup of coffee. The thought of this ghost came up for some reason, and by myself, I decided to start taunting this ghost. You're not real. You're a weak-ass ghost. If you're real, you'd be able to show yourself. And once I started to do that, the radio started like going in and out. Then I swear, every one of the powdered fire extinguishers that sat over the flat-top grills, all four went off at once, spewing powder every friggin' where. Scared the crap out of me, and I took off running. They had a fire investigator come in and said that someone had to physically pull the lever to make that happen. And I know for a fact where I was, nowhere near the lever, and the other inmate was in the bathroom. I would have heard him come out if he left that bathroom. As for an officer, the doors had a loud buzzing noise when they opened, and you would hear that, and there was none. Something pulled that alarm.
Well, I'd say that's a case of mess around and find out. Next, we have one from a young lady that took a class trip to Fremantle Prison, a trip she wishes she didn't take. It's called, I Saw Something Strange at Fremantle Prison.
This is my first post on Reddit, but honestly I don't know where else to talk about it and it's been weighing on me for years. For some backstory, I used to live in Western Australia, Perth, with my mother and my stepfather. This story happened when I was in year 5, I was 10 years old. Moving was rather difficult for me in year 4, new place, new school, new siblings, but finally away from the abuse and torture of my old home. Thankfully, after a year, things got easier. While my mental health was still an issue, I was settling in nicely with this new school. Just a few months before my birthday in year 5, my class and another year 5 class organized an excursion to Fremantle Prison as a history lesson in some sense. While I was nervous because it wasn't a place I was familiar with, I had my friends to lean on if I was overwhelmed. Once we arrived on the bus, the tour guide took us through the old prison. I was honestly amazed at the history and the layout. It was truly rather interesting. Eventually, the guide took us to the second floor. We stopped on the side as the guide taught us about the safety nets in between the stairs and how it was put in place because the inmates would attempt to either off themselves or others by pushing or jumping off the rail guards. As he was talking about it, I subconsciously looked to the side, being the curious 10-year-old I was, down the halls where the cells were. For those who know about Fremantle Prison, you might also know that it's said to be haunted by inmates that had passed away there in the past. As I looked down the hall, holding my friend's hand because I was overwhelmed by the amount of people, I noticed something. A person, I don't mean just a shadow, a whole frigging person. He was middle-aged, maybe around 45 to 50, he was completely naked except for some white underwear and had a large wound on his head. We stared at each other for a good 10 seconds, before he walked into a cell and disappeared from sight. The cell doors were shut, he just phased through the door. I was frigging horrified. I held my friend's hand tighter and shuffled so I was stood behind them. "What's wrong?" they asked, their voice soft and kind like always. I didn't respond, even if I wanted to, my voice just wouldn't come out. My friend stared at me for a moment before sighing. I'm guessing they assumed I was just a little shaken by the whole inmates offing themselves thing and wrapped their arm around my shoulders, keeping me close. Now I know my mental state back then was bad, and I had, and still do have, hallucinations due to the trauma I went through. but I genuinely believe that must have been something else. My hallucinations were never that detailed. Anytime I see a person, it's usually just a shadow. This guy looked real. I've never talked about this with anyone, not even my therapist, because honestly just thinking about it makes me paranoid. However, I needed to get it off my chest.
Holy crap, don't worry about you being horrified. That story even scared the ectoplasm out of me. Before we get into our next tale, I just want to take a moment to remind you to, assuming your hands are not trembling with terror at the moment, hit like and subscribe. It'll really raise our spirits, so to speak. And if you don't, I swear I'll come and haunt your house. I'll rattle chains at all hours of the night, yell boo while you're trying to sleep. I'll raid your fridge, and I'll, try on all your clothes and stuff. Just a lot of scary stuff. Next, we got one from a guard that works at a county jail, where he and an inmate see something neither of them can truly explain. It's called jail ghosts.
So, I worked at a county jail. One night I was working in a maximum security unit on the night shift. It was pretty boring with nothing to really do except checks where I go around and look in each cell every 30 minutes or so to make sure everything was okay. And the inmates weren't doing anything they weren't supposed to. It had been about 15 minutes or so since my last check, and I was sitting in the control room reading a book to pass the time. The control room sits higher than floor level and looks out over the cell block. If a person average height were to walk right by, you would only see the top of their head. As I'm reading my book, I see out of my peripheral the top of a bald head walk past the window. I knew that nobody else was in the area as another officer would have had to go through 2 sets of remotely open doors, and there was no way past my control room. I looked up and into the cell block. I didn't see anyone. I then looked at the camera monitors which showed every angle of the cell block. Still nothing. I put my book down and exited the control room, making sure to lock the door behind me in case an inmate got out of their cell. They couldn't lock me out of the control room. It's uncommon, but it is possible. I walked into the cell block, shining my flashlight into some of the more dimly lit areas. I took notice that I did not hear a cell door close, so if an inmate did get out of the cell, they would have either had to close their cell door incredibly quietly or they were hiding somewhere. I radioed for another officer to respond to my location as a backup. I began to conduct a check, making sure to count the inmates in each cell and pull on the door to make sure it was locked. When I reached the upper tier, one of the inmates was standing at the cell window and asked me what time it was. When I told him, he noted that I was early on my check and that I had been checking the doors. These guys have nothing to do but watch you. The inmate asked if I saw the bald-headed guy. He must have seen the expression on my face because he said that he was seen by somebody at least once a night, usually passing quickly by the cell windows. He said they always knew it was him because there were no bald officers on night shift. I went back to the control room and locked it behind me. I asked the officer who responded as my backup about the bald-headed guy. He was a very senior officer and said that he had never personally seen him, but it wasn't uncommon for officers to report it. I never saw the bald-headed guy again. Eventually I was promoted, and every once in a while an officer or inmate will ask me about him.
Wow, I can see that being so scary on so many levels. I mean, your first thought is, oh crap, a prisoner got out of their cell. Then when you check and try to apprehend him, poof, he's gone. Which probably won't calm your nerves much. Our next one comes from an OP that had an experience in the old Missouri State Penitentiary when she was a kid. It's entitled, My Experience at the Missouri State Penitentiary.
When I was 16, my class and I took a trip to the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri. We were traveling as a group from our AP government class, and I was with friends in the old jail. While we were in the old jail, they had us all walk up to the different levels of the building where all the cells were, and they would sound an alarm and have all the cells close and everyone walk down the few flights of stairs. However, when I was walking down the stairs, I slowly felt what I thought felt like 5 separate fingers touch my lower back, almost my butt. My friends were behind me and we would go around every once in a while and tease each other, so I assumed they were teasing me. So I turned up to look at them and say, "Hey guys, why did you grab me?" And they were a flight and a half above me. There was no way for them to rush down, grab me and run all the way back up the stairs without making any noise. My other friend was in front of me, and he raised hands and said, "I didn't do anything." Obviously he couldn't reach around, and I to this day don't know what grabbed me. All I know is for the rest of the time, it felt like someone was watching me and I couldn't sit in the gas chamber chair, as if something was holding me back. There was no way I was going to be able to sit, and eventually I had to leave early before everyone else because I felt like I was going to vomit. I've tried to explain my situation for years and still have no idea what happened that day. All I know is that a ghost wanted to be really friendly and obviously did not like that gas chamber.
Well, I've heard of friendly ghosts before, but I think that ghost was a little bit too friendly. Well, it looks like it's almost that time, but we do have enough time for one more story before you get to taste freedom again. And there is only one place that comes to mind where our ghost tour of prisons should come to an end. And that place is Alcatraz.
One of the creepiest places I've been to is Alcatraz, which, for those who aren't familiar, is an old former military fort, military prison, and federal prison built in the mid-1800s. In the 1960s, it was occupied by Native Americans who protested there for a couple of years. So there's a lot of history, to say the least. I've had many odd spiritual and paranormal experiences throughout my life, and most have been felt or heard rather than seen. So it makes sense that what happened at Alcatraz was mainly a kind of uncomfortable but exciting vibe, with a bonus, weird auditory experience. Being a musician, it probably makes sense that I sometimes experience auditory phenomena, but I digress. My husband and I took a vacation to San Francisco in 2006 and decided to do the Alcatraz night tour. The boat ride to get there was uneventful, as was the tour itself, although it was fascinating to see it and learn all about its history. If you're tuned into the vibe of the place, it's just plain old creep-a-rama. It literally was bone-chilling too, since it was at night. I apologize for not being a good writer, but I wanted to share my experience. After the tour, when it was almost time to get back on the boat to leave, I decided to use the restroom, which is out of the way in a little separate building off of a curvy path. Surprisingly, this path was all in the dark, so I started feeling a little uneasy since I was by myself. As I was walking by some bushes along the path, I heard a very distinct and very sinister macabre laugh. No, there wasn't an actual person hiding in the bushes, and there weren't any other tourists in the restrooms or on the path. I definitely felt that this was an entity, and it wanted to scare me. Needless to say that I ran the rest of the way to the bathroom and got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. I actually waited a while to think about that experience before I digested it and told my husband about it. Normally, he doesn't believe stuff like this, but he actually did believe me. The whole thing only lasted about 3 seconds, but I've never forgotten it. If you've ever been to Alcatraz, have you ever had any experiences like this?
Gee, that isn't something you expect at Alcatraz, laughter of any sort. But she does ask a pretty good question. In fact, I'd kind of like to know the answer to that myself. So if any of you have had an experience in Alcatraz, or any other prison for that matter, then please let me know down in the comments. Well, I think you have been through enough for one night. So, I hereby release you on your own reconnaissance. I hope you did not find your stay too scary. But do you know what is not scary? Hitting like, subscribe, and sharing this video. It'll really help us keep the ghosts at bay. However, if you prefer podcast, then you're in luck, because we also release our videos in podcast form on Spotify. And of course, if any of you have a story to share, or have any thoughts about our stories tonight, or if you have any suggestions on subjects for upcoming videos, then by all means, drop me a line in the comments. But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope the stories we told won't be giving you too many bad dreams. But if they do, then maybe you shouldn't run from them. After all, sometimes it's better to embrace your nightmares.